Good morning, boy. It's great to have you back. Welcome. We're beginning to get the first taste of fall coming in. I looked out my back and saw some of the leaves turning, and I thought, this is one of my favorite times of the year when all that color breaks forth around our city. So just want to welcome you back to Great Questions. Just delighted to have you here today. As you guys can see, we have a fairly substantial outline to work through, so we're gonna jump right into it. I'd like to start our session today by showing you the day America changed. The day America changed. So look up here on the screen for just a moment. Rainbow colors on the White House. It's June the 28th, 2015. It's the day that America changed, because on this day the Supreme Court passed that historic 5-4 ruling that declared same-sex relationships as legal. President Obama called it a victory for America. The Supreme Court called it the evolution of society. Those who were in opposition generally just countered by saying that this ruling changes the most basic social construct of our nation. And others would say it alters a 5,000-year-old basic building block of every society on earth. It's the day that America changed. So, how should we think about traditional marriage and same-sex relationships? It's a great question, isn't it? It's a great question. And it's one that's front and center, as these other questions have been in our daily life. It's things that people, many times, they feel so overpowering, as we talked about in Great Questions at the very beginning, that they intimidate you and you want to draw back. But I think in all these questions we're talking about, they're very fundamental in how you think about life and how you establish yourself in life. So going past the surface and probing them a little different is very, very important. So how should we think about traditional marriage and same-sex relationships? Well, let's begin. And by the way, we're going to pay close attention to your notes. So we're going to follow along. I'm going to read a lot of this and then make comments off of it. So be sure you're following along in your notes. So let's look and start today by looking at today's marriage landscape. Where do we presently stand when it comes to marriage? I think it's just good we get a sampling of what's out there. So here are some facts. First, traditional marriage today is clearly in decline. For the first time in U.S. history, more adults are single or cohabiting than they are married. That's for the first time in our nation's history. 40% of Americans, letter B, and 40% of millennials age 18 to 29 actually believe marriage is becoming obsolete. Now let me tell you, that's what, by the way, that's what the drug called a prosperous society does to people. When you become so prosperous and held up by financial stability, what happens is basic moral bedrock principles begin to seem like something you can pick and choose. They seem like stuff that you can just discard. It's not that big a deal. And so to say that marriage is obsolete, that really is somebody who's drugged, and ultimately that kind of drug seduces you in the beginning as a nation, and then it kills you in the end. Look at letter C. 62% of the American population favors gay marriage today. 41% of millennial evangelicals. Now, by a millennial evangelical, I'm talking about somebody whose worldview is, I'm Bible-oriented, I'm committed to the Scripture, I go to church on a regular basis. 41% of young millennials who are evangelical favor gay marriage, compared with 26% of the gray boomers. Letter D. As more and more women work, surveys show fewer feel the need to marry, especially for financial security reasons. This is a whole different question, but this is a whole gender revolution that's been occurring since the 70s. But fewer men today than ever before are able to be the primary financial provider for their families. So women are now more and more the sole breadwinner. In fact, this is kind of hard to believe, but in 40% of American households today, the woman is the primary breadwinner. And many lower to lower middle families today are single parent households, not because the woman who's providing most of the money couldn't get married, but as they do more and more surveys, they don't want to be married. And you know why they don't want to be married? Because to bring a man into that family unit, they may be relating to a man, but to bring a man into that family unit destabilizes that home, especially financially. So the lower to middle, lower income households, the woman is basically keeping the man at a distance because of the financial instability he brings into her life. She relates to him, she just don't want to be married to him. Letter E, 20% of today's millennials are married in America today. But if you'd go back a few years to 1960 to compare that, in 1960, almost 60% of millennials would already be married today. That's a huge difference in those decades. Letter F, grade divorce among senior adults has risen dramatically. For the first time in U.S. history, more Americans 50 and older are divorced, 15.4%, than widowed. Can you guys feel in these stats the shifting sand underneath our feet? Look at G. Single mothers are becoming the new normal in the 21st century. 64% of all millennial mothers give birth at least once out of wedlock. A single mother with a live-in boyfriend has only a 50% chance of that relationship lasting by the child's 5th birthday. Which for me is something, if I had the audience to be in front of a lot of millennials who live under this myth that cohabiting together before marriage or in our relationship will somehow make the relationship more stable when we do get married. In fact, I know a lot of boomer parents who've bought into that myth. And so when their son or daughter begins to live with somebody, they actually kind of are relieved because they think they'll work it out in that live-in relationship. And if they're not to be married, they'll break apart. But if they do get married, then it'll last longer. But the truth is, cohabiting relationships are way more unstable. And so the woman who has the live-in boyfriend, gets pregnant and stuff, thinks, well, now we've worked it out and I've got this baby. We're going to be blissfully happy for the rest of our lives. Just not true. 50% chance that relationship's going to end within 5 years. Letter I, 41% of all children in the U.S. now grow up without a dad. This is amazing. Letter J, a teenager in the U.S. has less of a chance of living with both biological parents than a teenager in any country in the world. The number of homeless children in America is now at an all-time high. And to put a little happiness at the last of these statistics, I've listed these two. Children raised by both biological parents are healthier, less troubled, and more successful in adult life than children from any other family background. And guys, look up here just for a second. You might want to make this note. All the social research confirms this. You don't hear a lot about that because it's politically incorrect. But all the social research just shouts that. And then lastly, married couples are happier than unmarried couples. In fact, marriage also raises one's likelihood of being very happy by 12%. That's why 75% of Americans say family is the most important element in their lives. That was all taken, or at least most of it, from the most recent Pew research that came out in a book, The Next America, just a couple of years ago. Okay, let's turn to the definition of marriage. the definition of marriage. I want to give you 3 views that are prevalent in our nation today. The first is what I call the historic traditional view. And here's the definition of that. Marriage is a legal union of a man and a woman in a commitment of exclusive love and fidelity for the purpose of deep companionship, care, and the bearing and rearing of children, all of which benefits the common good of society. Now that's a mouthful, but the reason I put all this out in print is because I want you to think about it after our session today. But traditional marriage is not what most young people think of it as. They think of it as marriage is just you love one another. It is a much more comprehensive view than that. It's talking about this lifelong companionship of care and commitment leading to the bearing and rearing of children and making a difference in the next world, because a traditional marriage through the producing or the reproduction of children, that's what causes a culture, a nation, a society, not only to survive, but thrive. When it's constantly, like a conveyor belt, reproducing these children who have some kind of personal stability because they are launched out of an incubator that has imbibed them with social, emotional, and spiritual health. That's how they move out into the world. Okay? And traditional marriage is the production unit that makes a society not just survive, but actually thrive. That's the historical traditional view. Then behind that is the historic Christian view. And by the way, the historic Christian view is what fueled the traditional view. They kind of match up as one and the same. But in the historic Christian view, marriage moves not just to being a union, it's a holy union of a man and woman before God in a lifelong commitment of exclusive love and fidelity as directed by the Scriptures and empowered by the Holy Spirit for the purposes of one flesh companionship and the bearing and the rearing of children to rule and subdue the earth for the glory of God. Now I want you to notice, again, in this particular definition, marriage is way more about a man and a woman just being in love. It's a man and woman in love that provides security and stability, but also provides the groundwork for the next society. Okay? That's very important. And when you lose that view, then you become real casual about the love relationship because you think you can take it or leave it. But a society that really understands the broader purpose of marriage understands the nation is at stake with every marriage because of what it contributes to the common good around us in the day-to-day, but also in the future good as well. That's why Genesis says this: God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. Now, I want you to underline this. And God blessed them. One of the first blessings of Scripture is God blessing this relationship. It gets a special blessing because it alone is unique in all other relationships. It's the only relationship that can replicate itself and reproduce. And He said, be fruitful and fill the earth and subdue it. Mark 10 says, but from the beginning, this is Jesus, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother, and the two shall become one flesh, so they are no longer two but one flesh. What God hath joined together, let no man separate. See, marriage is this unique, lifelong commitment. And you know, sometimes you need to stop and say, where did marriage come from? Did somebody just make it up? Was it some concept that some caveman, 15,000 years ago said, oh, I think it's good if we get together? The question is, where did marriage come from? Let me tell you, the secularists didn't come up with marriage. And it didn't just evolve. Marriage is something that was gifted to the human race as the basic building block of society. So that's where we've been. And by the way, that's where most societies have been for 5,000 to 10,000 years. And that's where America has been in the life of our country until 2015. Now we operate under a totally different definition, and it's been a seismic shift. I call this the new revisionist view. The new revisionist view. Here's the new definition of marriage in America today. Marriage is the union of two, and I put in there or more people, because by the way, under this new definition, it opens up other kinds of relationships. We just haven't launched them yet. But I noticed even in this last year, there's a whole new interest in polygamy. And it's going to be hard to ward off that once you consent to a different definition of marriage. But marriage right now is the union of two or more people, opposite or same sex, who commit to loving and caring for one another in a legally sanctioned arrangement that provides for the concrete need of spouses, the income, the property, the health, so on, that you hear so much about, and any children they bear, whether it's a natural birth, an artificial birth, birth through surrogates, or any other means, or that they adopt and then raise. That's the new definition. So there we have the three views. The first two, which were kind of the ones that have carried our nation forth from the beginning, have now been set aside with this new view now front and center. So let's go back just for a moment and ask the question, what makes a traditional or Christian marriage unique? Now for the young guys in the room, here's what I want to tell you. You can go all the way through life and no one ever sits you down and says, do you really know what marriage is? It's kind of what I used to deal with manhood. Do we really understand what a man is? Do we have a definition? And most of us that I've found as I've traveled the world, most guys can't even give you a good definition of manhood. But I think most of us could not give a good definition of marriage because it's so vague and it's been so generalized. But marriage, at least from a traditional or historic biblical view, is very specific. And so we want to look at what makes marriage, this relationship that we've counted on for so long, unique. There are three things that make it unique. Here's the first. It is a comprehensive union that nature, if you're an evolutionist, I put nature in here, if you're an evolutionist, or God designed. It's just this comprehensive union that nature or God designed. Look at number one. Marriage is clearly distinguished from every other form of close relationship in that it brings a man and woman into a natural and complete union with one another, both personally and physically. Okay? Now, let's just think about that for a moment. It takes this man, and think of nature if you don't want to think of God. It takes this man and woman, and they're different. See, we want to make them the same now. We just want to go against all of nature and just say, no, they're different. Okay? It takes this man and woman who nature or God has designed, and it brings them together so that they fit perfectly, both personally and physically. Psychologically, the woman thinks different than the man. We know that, don't we, guys? Okay? Women generally are much more nurturing, more comprehensive. Men are more focused and vocational in that they want to do something, earn something, provide for something. But they're different, so when they come together as nurturers and wage earners, just naturally, we can change all that, but just naturally, it provides a team that can then go on and supply the needs of the children that they produce. Okay? So they just have these natural roles through history that have complemented one another. They also are physically different. And that physical difference creates this fit that nature has provided. The guy's got a penis. The girl's got a vagina, and they fit. The penis can deliver the sperm. The woman's vagina delivers the egg. And then the miracle of life comes about in that union. It's a fit, so to speak, and they complement one another together. That's what we mean by a comprehensive union. Everything psychologically, relationally, and physically have this completeness to it in a comprehensive way. Look at number 2. The physical aspect of this union between a man and woman is highly significant. And by the way, all the governments of the past, all our government in our lifetime recognizes this highly significant physical aspect that we call consummating. Remember that word? Consummating the marriage, or completing the marriage, and then launching, according to nature's design, a legacy called children, which again is a huge reason for marriage. It's not just love. Marriage is not just about love. Marriage is about the survival of the fittest. Marriage is about the future as well as the common good of the present that can only happen when you're creating these healthy individuals who then bless a culture presently and in the future. And a marriage only becomes a marriage when it's consummated physically, which provides for the potential of the next generation. That's why we call it completed. And that's why in the past, number 3, any union of two people that is not completed by the natural, physical, sexual union is not considered comprehensive. And that's been stated in law. Many states explicitly require by law physical consummation of the marriage for the marriage vows to be considered valid. In other words, you're not really married until you've had sex. In other states, a marriage can be voided if consummation has not taken place. Anal sex or oral sex are not considered acts that consummate a marriage, because these acts fall short of completing, this is the key word, of completing the full physical expression that nature created from the beginning, or God, and had in mind when it designed the two people to be together. Those two sex acts may be pleasurable, but here's the problem, guys. They lack the power of reproduction. They lack reproductive power. So number 4, breaking with the natural functioning of one's body, then as you read in Scripture, is kind of part of the Apostle Paul's argument about same-sex unions. He says in Romans 1, for their women exchange, this is back in Roman times, where homosexuality was rampant. For their women exchange the natural function for that which is unnatural, and in the same way also the men abandon the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire for one another. Men with men. Number 5, only traditional marriage can offer two people a comprehensive natural union, both personally and physically. Because only in this one man, one woman relationship can it be said, all of me has all of you in a way that God designed or nature designed that's not to be shared with anyone else. All the way back 2,000 years ago, the writer of Hebrews was saying marriage is to be held in honor among all, and the marriage bed is to be undefiled. For fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. But let me tell you, a secular society also knew and appreciated the fact that we must protect marriage against all other relationships. And by the way, no other relationship up until just recently has had legal protections. And the question you ask is, why does marriage and not friendships have legal protection? Why does marriage and not teammates have legal protection? Why does marriage and not workmates? Why does marriage and not war buddies have legal protections around it to provide for this union? It's because it is the key building block to the future as well as the present. So, marriage is a comprehensive union that nature or God designed. Secondly, it is a procreative union that also provides the best conditions for raising children. Traditional marriage is affirmed by nature in its ability to reproduce. And not just reproduce, but raise healthy children. By the way, if you were an evolutionist, you would see marriage as the evolved state. Think about it. It's the evolved state because it alone provides for the survival of the future. Every other relationship is less than. That's if you're thinking evolution. Okay? If you're thinking spiritually, there's even grander reasons for making it such an exalted state. Number two, the presence of both biological parents in an exclusive relationship with no other adults added has been proven to be the ideal environment for raising children. All credible social research offers the same conclusion. Here's what it is. Children fare best on every indicator of well-being when reared by their wedded biological parents. Children raised by both biological parents are healthier, they do better with other children academically, get in less trouble, are less prone to substance abuse or criminal behavior, are more successful as adults in their jobs and careers. Nothing helps a child more than being raised by his or her biological parents in a stable marriage. Now, you can underline stable marriage because unstable marriage reduces parenting effectiveness for sure. And we know that. But here's the problem. You always hear them say, well, yeah, but that's just in a perfect marriage to be good parents. There's so many of them that are unstable. Well, that's true. It's unstable. But what do you do if marriage is in a present condition or unstable in a community? You don't throw marriage out. What you should do is say, we need to be investing more in young people's marriages to make them stable, not just give up on them, which is, I think, unfortunately, what happens oftentimes. Most millennials go to church or walk into the workplace today not believing in marriage, as we saw in that statistic. They've seen so many failures, they just think it's not worth it, so why even try? I'll just live with my girlfriend. And if we don't make it, great, we hadn't hurt each other, we'll just move on. Again, fairly naive, but it's a natural conclusion if you grew up in a broken home. Number three, recent short-term social research that makes the claim that gay couples can parent as well as biological parents should be considered highly suspect. Now, by the way, the AMA, American Medical Association, other professional organizations have produced research, short-term research that say, gay parenting, single parenting is just as good as biological parenting, okay? And you hear that or read that and you go, well, I guess that's true. But here's what I want you to know. I don't think it's true because short-term research that I grew up claimed years ago that divorce and single parenting wasn't going to bother a child either. Kids are resilient. They'll get over it and they'll do better. If the parents aren't fighting and if their mom is single, she can do just as good a job as anybody else by herself. And the gay studies now say that gay parents can raise, I've even seen some, they could raise children better than biological parents. But here's the thing, that's always one-term, short-term, one-generational research. I think that is so politically twisted. Because I grew up in an era when marriages started breaking down and we went through no-fault divorce and everybody said divorce is okay. Okay, we've lived with that now for several generations and we can look at the results. Here's the results. Longer-term studies showed that those short-term results were flawed and untrue. The truth is, all other forms of family, no matter how good, fall short of what stable biological parents can provide. By the way, I just read a big article from young people who are now millennials who grew up in same-sex homes. And we're just getting the first wave of research from those men and women who grew up with two moms or two dads. And the reports are not good. There's all kinds of confusion and anger about what that home life was like and how it impacted them in trying to grow up in a modern society. So look at letter C. Marriage, the third thing, is it's a cultural enhancing union with a proven historic track record for being one of the primary pillars of upholding a society. Number one, history demonstrates that marriage is a social megaforce that shapes a nation one couple at a time. One couple at a time. Look at number two. In 1949, Dr. Carl Zimmerman of Harvard University wrote an insightful book entitled Family and Civilization. Zimmerman's book addressed the question, was there any specific correlation between a nation's fitness, its economic and social well-being, and its family patterns? And by the way, Zimmerman's research covered ancient civilizations all the way to present-day civilizations. And it was a massive work. In fact, I went on Amazon and bought it. It cost me a ton because there's only a few copies left. But it's an incredibly documented and well-researched book. But he was asking this question, is there any correlation between a nation's health and its families? And he answers with a resounding yes. Nations rise when marriages are strong and central. On the other hand, nations decline and crumble when two things happen. Here are the two things. First, when marriage loses its sacredness in the culture. In other words, it's taken casually as just, well, we love each other. That's all that counts. But it's increasingly broken by divorce. And let me say this, since we're comparing traditional marriage or marriage with same-sex relationship, just so we're clear about this message today. The real threat is not gay marriage. It's not. It's dysfunctional traditional marriage. That's the real threat of a society. Gay marriage is just kind of a secondary byproduct of that we want to at least be schooled on, but the real threat of a nation is its marriages. Secondly, when alternative forms of marriage arise that broaden and lower the meaning of marriage. In other words, young people forget what marriage is really all about, that marriage is much bigger than just them being happy. It has a much greater impact overall, and they should carry that responsibility into their relationship. When those two things unravel, what happens, according to Zimmerman, is you can watch a nation's strength and will and prosperity eventually peak and decline when these alternative forms of marriage start proliferating and divorce becomes rampant. It's kind of a signal, a warning signal that this civilization is beginning to wane and will end. Number three, what should be apparent is this. Divorce, absentee fathers, out-of-wedlock births, single parenting, and the overall decline of marriage go hand in hand with a plethora of social pathologies that are flooding America today. As marriage declines, it is only natural, of course, for the government to step in and seek to become society's parent. But regardless of money, regardless of halfway houses, adoption centers, foster care, regardless of all those good things, you can't do as a society, as a government, what only marriage can do. And that's reproduce a healthy next generation. So here's the bottom line. It's this. Good marriages seed a culture with healthy and productive citizens who promote the common good of society. That's why the Bible starts with marriage. By the way, that's why the Bible starts with marriage. It doesn't start with the church. It doesn't start with government. The only institution the Bible starts with as kind of, the first building block that's going to square off this structure that we're going to build, the first building block is marriage. That's what you read in Genesis 2. Fools ignore this fundamental reality, and foolish nations do too. So let's fill in this graph, and we'll look at, really, this is what a marriage is. This is what, by the way, if I were a parent, I'd want my kids to know this, not necessarily with a chart, but I'd want them to hear me talk about this, about what is marriage. A marriage is this. It does three things. First, it joins a man and a woman in a comprehensive union that God designed. A comprehensive union where everything fits personally, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. Everything fits. Nature declares that. Secondly, it's a relationship, or traditional marriage is a relationship that is blessed by God to create and launch healthy children. That's why God blessed them and said, be fruitful. Because God knew, as He gave His blessing to this first couple, that only here could society survive and thrive. And then lastly, traditional marriage promotes the common good of society. I mean, when families are stable, community life, schools, the safety of that community or that neighborhood, all those things just kind of naturally find balance. But as homes break down, as marriages decline, as alternate forms of relationships begin to seed a community, here's what you feel. We can't let our kids go out on their bikes in the neighborhood. We have to lock our cars, drive them into the garage, and close the door. We got to have spotlights on our house that come, motion detectors. When we go to the mall, you need to be looking out for yourself. See, you get on the news and you just hear one murder and one event after the other. All those things are just signals, and in our government and everything else thinks we got to go in and create programs that somehow will rescue us from this. And here's all I want you to know. No! It's not going to happen. I can tell you already. It's not going to happen. The only thing that will rescue us, other than God, okay? Of course, that's my position. But if I were just a secularist, I'd say the only thing that can address this massive problem is we've got to have men and women who understand marriage and can get along together. Because if the kids are good and the marriages are good, the community will feel good and safe. And the society will be elevated. And these children will grow out and they'll be ambitious to make a difference in the world and take on new scientific discoveries and advance the cause of a healthy society around the world. That will just naturally happen without anyone having to regulate it. But if that doesn't happen, the common good that used to be so clear about marriage, that gets lost, and it's just, marriage is just about, you just love each other. That's it. Just these feelings. We have feelings for each other, and those feelings bring us together, and those feelings are our legal right to then separate because we don't have them anymore. If we really understood what marriage was about, we would know, no, as you leave your wife or leave your husband, the nation is at stake. That's what's really going on. That's marriage. So let's move to number 4, how legalizing same-sex partnerships as marriage will impact the future. I'm going to give you 3 things. First, letter A, it will radically redefine marriage as simply a romantic and emotional union of people. That's the new definition. It's just a romantic and emotional union of people. As many gays celebrated after the 2015 decision to legalize same-sex relationships, the posters that they carried, and rightfully so, because this is what they'd been pushing for, but the posters said it all. On the poster was, love wins. That's it. Love wins. You just realize that you can't hold me back from having these strong feelings for a partner, and I want that to happen, and that's what really marriage is all about. It's about love winning. And I want you to know it's much more than that, but that was the cause. So number 1, romantic emotional love. We have the right to marry because we love each other. Now replaces the more specific, which is one man, one woman, natural, where everything fits, and procreative definition of marriage. This loss of the traditional meaning of marriage not only lowers the original definition of marriage, but it also invites any kind of romantic people union, whether it be polygamous, whether it be some kind of transgender triad or whatever, and you hear all kinds of new things that are out there in our culture today. But it makes every one of those now as a possible legal union. It's just open-ended, because here's the thing. How can you stop a man from marrying 3 women if they love each other? And let me tell you, the courts will yield eventually to things like that. Because love wins. Love wins. So marriage now becomes whatever romantic union of people makes you happy. Second, it will further obscure the value of opposite-sex parenting for children. And I say it will, it already has. You'll see as we look at these notes. But you take away nature's testimony and that of the Bible that a union of a man and a woman is the best environment for rearing children. And now, and this is key, you can underline this, now any kind of love relationship becomes equally good for children. Now guys, look, that's not true, but our society says it's true because love wins. You can't stand up to that because you become a bigot if you do. That's why number 2, this obscuring of the higher value of a biological mom and dad, which is now already rampant in our politically correct culture, and overly sensitive to supporting single parents, blended families, and parent figures like a grandmother, an aunt, or whatever that's raising children. By the way, all those people are heroic people because they're stepping into the gap and trying to help their families. So I'm not so much against what they're doing at all. I applaud what they're doing. It's wonderful that they're trying to make a difference in their kids' lives. But here's the key line. But as wonderful and loving as some of these people are, here's what we need to realize. They always fall short of what stable biological parents can better provide. They just do. Now they can make up a lot of that, especially some of them because of their ability to be a substitute parent. But it's an exception to this much bigger general rule. Social research clearly backs the fact that 2 biological parents create the best well-being for a child. So look at number 4. At its very best, same-sex parenting is simply single parenting times 2. And we have well-documented research on the effects and limitations of a single parent. And the long-term effects of same-sex parenting, that is yet to be determined through real social research. We just got short-term research, and some of that's not even good. But long-term, it's going to create, again, just like single parenting is created, especially in their cities, it's going to create a plethora of social pathologies. Number 5, healthy children requires more than love. Every child is best served by male and female input from his or her biological parents. Nature shouts this. The Bible shouts this. Unfortunately, unless legal and social pressure is applied to uphold this ideal, it will be ignored and more children will suffer wounded childhoods. And sadly, the wounds of childhood are not only the longest lasting wounds, they are also the hardest wounds to be healed from. And then third, it will inevitably attack moral and religious freedoms. See, we have a new culture war now. It's a war between sexual rights and religious liberty. And they've been clashing already head on together with one another. As sexual rights have arisen around abortion, contraceptive, homosexuality, same-sex marriage, religious groups have continually found themselves on the losing side. I was part of some of the early initiatives in what they call the culture wars, and I remember one of the guys who was leading our committee when we were working for the Unborn Child Amendment came in, and he had been to a big national conference of religious leaders, and their consensus was, we lost. The war's over. So now we're just kind of in mop-up. Now sexual rights leaders have become increasingly bold, having won that initial foray. They want not only increasing sexual freedoms, but now we've moved into phase 2, where they want to force religious objectors to affirm their choices and even pay for them. Isn't that where we are? Don't you feel that? Healthcare and all the other things, you keep feeling this. You can't just give in to me. You've got to agree with me. And if you don't, we're coming after you. So here's some illustrations of that. Fines and legal punishments are in the future for those who don't affirm gay sexuality. Traditional marriage advocates are being portrayed as bigots, sexual racists, gay bashers, for being prosecuted some future day to be about hate crimes. And of course, we do already see hate crimes for anything that gets near the homosexual. Religious students are now banned from objecting to homosexuality. Public schools are now teaching homosexuality as a morally good lifestyle. I just recently read where Christian judges in our legal system right now are being blocked when in their interrogation you find out that they have these strong religious convictions. And all of a sudden that becomes kind of grounds that you've been going to church. Well, you can't be a judge. That's some of the pressure we're starting to feel. Number 6, more and more non-gay adolescent children will be confused by a pro-gay culture and enticed by gay behavior. Gay sex has become cool, even if you're not gay. Okay, so let's go to crunch time. We're going to finish up. In crunch time, how should churches and Christians think, and what should we do? Now, these are my ideas. I don't expect them necessarily to be your ideas. I'm just throwing them out there, and then we can discuss this later. But here's what we need to know. Same-sex marriage is now the law throughout the United States. And this will create significant long-term social implications that we as Christians will have to deal with because we won't be able to ignore them. It will come knocking on our door. It's not that you can just cloister away and whisper to one another. You're going to be pulled out into the sunlight with your particular belief. The next generation of millennials will make same-sex marriage socially acceptable. In fact, 70% of millennials right now favor same-sex marriage. Letter C, since America is a secular democracy governed by law, Christians are just going to have to accept the legality of the same-sex union while maintaining a respectful and necessary faith separation. We'll talk about that next. But we're in a place where it's just there, and we've got to get over it. And by the way, in all of this, I don't want you to hear me bashing gay people. I'm just talking about a gay union, all right? That's real important. I'm just talking about where society is constructing itself. I just want us to have a sense of what we're actually talking about, which brings me to letter D. The church should welcome gays to church, okay? They should. They should welcome gays to church. Gay people are no different than anybody else. All right? They just aren't. They have one thing that's very important to them, okay, in their sexual orientation. But that's true of people in their different orientations. Different people are inclined to different interests. People are inclined to different struggles. There are people who struggle with addictions, drinking, food, outside of marriage relationships. There's all kinds of things we struggle against. And they shouldn't be set up as unique because of their one inclination, okay? Because they're just like us. And there's no problem having friendships and that kind of thing. This is not anything against gay people generally. My brother was gay. He's a gay lawyer down in Houston. And of course, I was an evangelical pastor, and that created some tension in the beginning. But we worked that through. And we loved each other. We interacted together and that kind of thing for years. And I think he had more of a problem with me than I had with him, you know. But I went down to Houston. He lived in the around MD Anderson down there, and there was a whole gay community. I got to know his buddies and that kind of thing. I was also there when he contracted AIDS. And I also cared for my brother. I remember my brother coming to Little Rock when he was about to die. And I remember we went over and sat in the church. And my brother believed in God. And we interacted some over that. But we also disagreed. And it was okay that we disagreed. But he died. And it was a big loss to our family. So I just want you to see, this is not some haranguing against gays. We're just trying to find our way in this new social construct. And the church should be fine about gays coming to church the same way that you should be fine about your friend who's living with his girlfriend coming to church. You know? As Christians, we would say both are not right. But that doesn't keep us from interacting and enjoying the relationship we can have in that regard. But this is the key, okay? What I'm about to read you is the key. For those gays who wish to seriously follow Jesus, this is where things begin to turn a little bit. And let's say they want to join the church. The church should offer an instructional path to that end. And that instruction should include understanding what followership means, including repentance from gay sexual behavior and a commitment to ongoing same-sex celibacy. And the modern church should not capitulate to the culture. It should stand in face of the culture and hold this position relentlessly. Now let me tell you, immediately in light of the world in which we live, you're going to say, wait a minute, you're going to forbid these people from having this love relationship, this sexual love relationship together, they love each other, and keep them from that? No, they're free to do that. I'm just saying if they want to follow Jesus, then we need to listen to Jesus and give up in Jesus' name the things that we need to give up in order to be a disciple of Jesus. Okay? So what the church would ask a gay person to do would be no different and not less hard than single people being told they shouldn't have out of wedlock sex. Okay? Now, many of them are still do it, and we're going to have to work through that. But if they want to be a follower of Jesus, you see, that's forbidden. Immoral relationships outside of marriage. Remember Hebrews 13, let the marriage bed be undefiled? So that means I've got to let that immoral sexual relationship go. I've got to deny myself of that, although I have all the urges for that as a single person. There are way more single people who would struggle with giving that up than there are even gay people. But yet Jesus asked the same thing. The same way He would ask a husband who's married to give up any kind of out-of-marriage relationship with a mistress. Or He would ask somebody who struggles with alcohol to give up alcohol, just abstain from it. And those who are addicted to it, they need to seek treatment and help to stay off of it, even though they feel an urge for that. That's hard. All these things are hard. Or the person who struggles with their weight to stop eating or to start exercising. Everything in life that's an urge is not a right. Not in the spiritual realm. And all Jesus is saying is, if you want to follow me, now hear His words. If you want to follow me, take up your cross. The cross is a metaphor of dying to self. And follow me, and I'll show you a better life. So that's the call to a better life. And the call is no harder on a gay person than it is on a single person or an addicted person or anybody else. Now, I know that's offensive to a gay person because you're saying that's sin. Yeah, I am. I am saying it's sin. But it's the call of Jesus of the church, and the church should hold that position while in society we treat a gay person not as a gay person but as a person with all the dignity of being that person and that friend and everything else. Just like the guy sitting next to us who's sleeping with a girl every weekend. See, that's the position of the church. But here's the documentation of that position. 1 Corinthians 6. It says, don't be deceived. Now this is in the spiritual realm. Neither fornicators, that single guy who's fornicating, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, that husband who's sleeping with his secretary, nor effeminate, nor homosexuals, nor thieves, nor the covetous, nor the drunkards, the addicted people, the revilers, nor swindlers. Those people are not going to get the best in life if they continue in that behavior, because it holds them back from the abundant life that Jesus said He came to give. They can live that way. They've got a legal right to be that way. Jesus is just saying, I got a better way, if you trust me. And by the way, the early church was filled with all those kind of people. Because notice the next line. He's listed all those people, and then he says, and such were some of you. This was you. The church is made up of all these people. But you decided to follow Christ, and you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus and the Spirit of our God. So letter E, the church and Christians should fight for the word marriage. Though Christians in the church have lost the legal fight for marriage as only between a man and a woman, I think, this is just my personal opinion, we should continue to fight for the word marriage, especially in our homes, as a word reserved for only the relationship between a man and a woman. And that's because words matter. Now, the world's not going to do that, but within our Christian communities, to me, marriage ought to stay a man and a woman. Okay? Just like we ought to say in December, Merry Christmas, not Happy Holidays. Because words matter. They convey something. And when we withhold that, that'll create discussions that we can talk about. But all love relationships are not equal. They're just not equal. That's why God has put so much into this one relationship that He blessed right at the beginning of time, and that most societies understood, and that's why they legally protected that one relationship. So, letter F. Other legal relationships, gay or otherwise, I just simply call them partnerships. I call them partnerships, not marriage. Because the minute you lose that distinction, as Christians, it's a huge loss, because everything gets dumbed down to just love and nothing else. And that's not what marriage is about. Marriage is about love. But it's also about the kingdom of God. It's also about the survival of a society. And then G, the uniqueness of Christian marriage should be vigorously taught and held up by the church. The connection of a one-man, one-woman marriage to the health and well-being of children should be strongly promoted as not only the best for children, but for the best of society. And I say that because the thing I wish churches would even be stronger in today is training and discipling and encouraging young people in understanding the broader aspects of marriage and the broader aspects of parenting. If I could wave a magic wand over the church, every church would have a marriage training center and a parenting training center. And the reason for that is because you just don't somehow get it in those two key areas. You've got to be instructed in it, in those two key areas. And then lastly, Christian parents will need instruction on how to raise their children in a pro-gay culture. In other words, understand the things we just talked about, so with their friends, as they get older and stuff, they know how to get along and love and encourage their gay friends and stuff like that, but also maintain, remember, that faith separation. That's going to be important. So here's our conclusion, and we're going to take a break. I just want to say this again. There is nothing like traditional marriage or biblical marriage. I hope you felt that the elements are far bigger than just love. It is unique. It's a one-of-a-kind relationship, because traditional marriage is 5 things. It's a marriage that's affirmed by nature. It's affirmed by nature as designed. I mean, it's as designed. I mean, I look out in my backyard at the geese and the deer and the birds that come in and put nest in my you know, my pavilion back there that I have to chase them out, and the squirrels and everything else. But they know how to hook up. They know how to replicate the next society of squirrels and birds and geese. It's nature. It's God's design. And it works. Okay? And that's what traditional marriage is. It's affirmed by nature or God as designed. Secondly, it's affirmed by the Bible as God ordained. As God ordained. That's why at the beginning of Genesis, right at the beginning, you encounter marriage and God blesses it as primary to the future. It's affirmed by social research as the best for raising children. It's affirmed by culture. If you have a big view of culture over great lengths of history, as necessary for survival. And it's affirmed by history as proven. This is what is at stake in the new day and in the new America.